I'm deeply profound and moved by hearing you all share. You've got immense bravery beyond your years, and I had no idea we were doing trigger warnings. I've got a few talks that have trigger warnings, but in order for you to share your personal stories, you should be immensely proud of yourselves, because that takes a lot of courage, and those kinds of talks weren't happening when I was at school, and that's not, well, I like to think it's not that long ago, but you're doing yourself an immense service, and just thank you for sharing those. This might feel like a bit of a transition now, but my topic kind of unites us all. It doesn't discriminate, and it's something that is open to everyone. I'm only a guest speaker in name, I should say, as well. There's nothing really, I think you've just thrown me in at the end, so thank you for letting me be part of this. My name's Matthew, if you don't know me, and I'm a HE student at Merrist Wood. So for my topic, I'm going to talk about nature and how it's under threat. And for this, I've got a case study on biodiversity using the Californian kelp forest. Before we get too far into this, I just want to discuss what biodiversity is, because it can be misconstrued and misconceptions of it. There's three main definitions that we use for biological diversity. As you can see, over the years, it's changed quite a bit, but largely it's the variety of life on Earth, and that can be through ecosystems, through species, and through genetics as well. If we break these down, looking at genetic diversity, this looks at the differences in particular in one species, so this might be through mutations, so different pigments of skin, or through pigments of different body types as well. This is also things that can't be seen, such as heritage, such as dominance and other traits, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with all of the members of the species. When we look at species diversity, this is broadening the scope further to look at other species within that same habitat or ecosystem, as well as the different genetics within one particular species. And then broader so is the ecosystem diversity. This looks at nutrients in the soil, and also how the ecosystem interacts with the species around it. Using those three main frameworks, if you like, the Conservation on International Biodiversity Foundation discovered 36 hotspots of biodiversity within our global system. These find what's known as species that are just limited to that particular area of land. You'll see as well that most of them aren't landlocked. They all have most have like a coastal access point as well. When we come to, you'll see as well the Californian forested province is also included within this list. And getting on to talk about kelp. In California, there's 6 common types of kelp, but in California the main ones are giant kelp or Macrocystis pyrifera, and bull kelp or Neocystis luteolma. Within the Californian kelp ecosystem, this supports much variety of species, even as small as the plankton, right up to larger sea mammals such as otters and killer whales, seals. But we don't just value biodiversity by what's included within that ecosystem. We also look at things such as ecosystem services. These are things that we might not immediately think about, such as what we can get from nature. So whether that's the water we drink or the food we eat, also the defences systems that we might not recognise, such as flood control when it's been heavy rainfall, and also the tools that we can use in education from these ecosystems themselves. If we graded the Californian kelp system with this model, you'll see that there's quite a range of ecosystem services that it provides for us. Some key in particular is the carbon capture quality of this ecosystem. It's thought that it could be around 20% more carbon absorbent than an acre of forest. And what's very interesting about this is that the kelp themselves also act as a natural depollutant, if you like. So they control the nutrients in the water, and they also stop acidification within those ecosystems as well. But if you were just to take the kelp on its own, you can get a diverse range of products from harvesting this. So food, biofuel, biopackaging, cosmetics, fertilizer, the list is pretty much endless really. And if we come back to those ecosystem services again, you'll see that this ecosystem has covered a lot of ground within the services that we look for. But as I mentioned before, this particular ecosystem is under lots of threats, and we're going to look at them now. This was moving, but it hasn't moved. So you'll see that there's a large coverage of kelp in 2008. But if I draw your attention to the graph below, you'll see how quickly this has changed. And it's thought that around 96% of this land, this coverage, has been reduced just in the last decade. This can have some pros and cons for species. In the top graph, you'll see the different species, how they've changed over time. This is just from them being collected and fished. The only species which seems to have gained from this is the rockfish. Other than that, most of the species have declined. So there's pros and cons, but largely it's not looking too good for the kelp. So where you once had a system that would look like this, lots of diversity, lots of opportunities for fish nurseries, and also what the kelp's doing itself is providing those ecosystem services, it would quickly change to this. Oh. Thank you. So this has been defined as a rocky barren, where only one particular species, in this case the purple sea urchin, has taken over that whole ecosystem. And because they harvest kelp, you can see there's pretty much no kelp in sight there. Some of the reasoning for this, there's been large events known as El Nino events, which are larger than normal warming of oceans. These particular events caused mass die-outs of kelp, but also within other species in that ecosystem. You'll see on the top right, the bull kelp. This is typical of storm damage. Now, this does happen very often, and usually the productivity of the kelp means that it can come back from these events. But other things such as human biotic factors, such as sewage and harvesting, have also impacted the kelp too. To add to that as well, we used to have sea otters in this population, as well as kelp being harvested around 1800s. These were harvested and fished almost to extinction, and that had a big impact on the ecosystem, which we'll look at. So on the left, we have an ecosystem with the sea otters, and on the right, if you took away just that one species, it can have a detrimental effect on all of the species around it. So this is often referred to as a trophic cascade. And if you think about Yellowstone, if you know Yellowstone quite well, when they brought back the wolves, all of the ecosystem around it began to flourish and come back to life. But it's not just the sea otters that are important in this ecosystem. Speaking about those heat waves before, this caused the sunflower starfish to die out dramatically across that period, meaning that as of now, the IUCN red lists this species and the sea otters as critically endangered. The sheephead wrasse is also a key predator when it comes to purple sea urchins, but compared to the other two, it doesn't eat as much as them. The sea otters can have about 50 sea urchins a day. Sorry, sea otters can, and the starfish is around 5 a day. But how do we prioritize what ecosystems we want? Well, it's no secret that our current carbon emissions are skyrocketing from previous levels. If you include this with our consumerism over the past 20 to 50 years, it's way beyond where it's been in the last 200 years. Everything is moving at a cost, and we need to find a way of doing so quickly to turn the tide on this. When we talk about where we can invest more of our time, only less than 9% of our ocean is protected, and considering that 70% of the globe is covered in ocean, this is quite striking, really. Also, politically as well, we're not quite going far enough to improve these marine areas. This treaty was signed last year, but yet still we feel behind on where we should be. And I know I've spoken about California quite a lot, droned on about it. So if you think about kelp in the real sense, it's not just abundant, well, it was abundant in California. There's lots of different areas where kelp is present, none more so than the UK in particular. But all of these areas are facing huge declines. One of the ways we can tackle this is by introducing ways of conservation through finding and harvesting sea urchins from that ecosystem, taking them out, and what's become quite popular is a growing food market, particularly in Asian cuisine, for sea urchins. This hasn't gone far as commercially yet, but it's still private restaurants and things like that. There's also opportunities to grow and harvest new kelp and then replant it, such as kelp farms, one of which came up in Scotland, Cornwall, but it's had some bite back from the local communities there, particularly as they see it as an eyesore, but we don't see, what we're not putting forward is these other benefits that these have for ecosystems. If we can start to build back the populations of sea otters or other predators as well, this could have a big impact on kelp forests around that ecosystem, but also just trapping and finding ways of removing those sea urchins altogether. Using Kelp Watch, this is still an online system, so you can find a website if you like, and it shows you not just the kelp in California, but globally. We can start to see that the kelp is improving once again, but this is largely down to less harvesting of the kelp and also making sure that sea otter populations are protected in the areas which they're found. But here in the UK, in 2019, they launched the Sussex Kelp Recovery Project. This was a group of different organisations such as Sussex Wildlife Trust and Blue Marine Foundation, and their aim is to improve on protecting kelp areas, because you'll see in 1980, this is what we used to have as a kelp coverage in Sussex. In 2009, it was drastically reduced to way less than half of what was there previously. So thinking about what we could do as a collective, if we can support organisations such as this, maybe through volunteering, maybe through donating, and drawing attention to these areas, it would definitely have a great impact for the kelp of the future to come. Thank you very much for listening.